Rendell is a program analyst at Nemours Health and Prevention Services, works on the adolescent team there, and is also the father of 2 adolescents. So I think we have sort of a resident expert here in the house tonight to talk with us, and he will be presenting on a parent survival guide to social media. So please join me in welcoming Rendell.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, or good evening, I should say. I guess it does make me a resident expert in the sense that I do have two kids, so bear with me if I share some quick war stories with you. What I like to do today is just go over some things that I think is very important to us all. For many of us, I'm sure we are either parents, guardians, caregivers, aunts, uncles, maybe even grandparents. And so the things that we're going to go over hopefully will act as a baseline for us to communicate with our children moving forward. So the first slide I just want to share with you is this to give you the breadth and scope of what's going on as far as this thing called Facebook. How many people have heard of Facebook? And so as you can see, it says 1 out of 13 people on the earth are on this vehicle. So it just kind of shows you the power of Facebook. And it just also shows you how much the folks are getting involved and having conversations with each other. In fact, on that previous slide, I think the number is 817 million folks globally are on Facebook. And prior to that, that was roughly 500,000 in the year 2011. So you probably, when you look at this slide, you probably say, well, this looks like my kid, or this looks like my nephew. As you can see on the far left-hand side, you see that nearly all the students today are texting. A survey was done in this case where roughly 94% of the folks were engaged in some kind of texting. And then from, I guess, from a parental perspective, we might look at it as being a form of addiction. In this case, they show that it's roughly 60% of the folks felt as though students were engaged in that type of activity. You also have some other good news, is that some folks in the room are probably amongst the 35, or I should say the 30% of people 35 and over that are engaging in Facebook. I happen to be not one of them. Not to say that I would like to eventually engage in them, but I'm involved in this environment virtually every day just by the nature of my work. So I look at this from a perspective of almost an analyst, of just digging in to this whole social media platform so we can engage the adolescents community, which is part of my responsibility. This slide pretty much talks about some of the things that, questions that have been brought up by many of the parents based on the feedback that we initially received prior to today's engagement. And one of the first questions that have been asked is, well, when is the appropriate time for a child to actually enter into social media? And the actual appropriate time is actually the age 13. According to the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, the requirements are that you have to be 13 years of age. Companies like Google, Twitter, Facebook, they all have an obligation to ensure that they inquire and receive some kind of information up front before they can engage into any additional types of advertising, which are some of the things that you might receive as an adult. In addition to that, on Facebook, what you'll find is that when I was doing this analysis, according to a consumer report, it's estimated that roughly 7.5 million preteens, that's folks from 0 to 10, are actually on Facebook, and including that, that's roughly 5 million are of the age of 10 years of age, which says that parents are now starting to acquiesce to the kids' pressures to get on Facebook. And so there's a responsibility that goes along with that. What I also highlighted was, if you look under the year 2012, And if you could just look for the span of from 0 to 11, 12 to 17, and 18 to 24, you can notice that there's a progression of steady increase, and it's obviously trending forward, and it's just a thing that we all have to accept. Everybody's eventually going to be on some kind of social media platform. So what I tried to do is break it down into age groups. So we'll start with the up to age 10. And so as a parent, it's never too early to have a positive relationship with your child. And it's a good opportunity with this whole social media platform is to, talk to the kids about the importance of what the computer means to them and how it fits into their life, and also answer any of the questions as it relates to their curiosity. In doing so, it's also equally important when they're at this very young age that you have to be online with them, literally over their shoulders. I can recall with my kids, I would call them drive-bys. They would be on the computer by their, we had it in a separate room in a study, and they would be on a computer, and I would just periodically just drive by. Little did they know I was inspecting their, what they were looking at, but as a parent, I felt compelled to do so. By doing so, I felt as though we were, as parents, and I have to say we, because I stated earlier that I have to give my wife a lot of credit for giving me the sage and wisdom to be even a better parent. Please take note and send that email to my wife. But we set clear rules with our kids as it relates to the relates to the internet, and so we ensured that they weren't sharing any kind of personal information, because we've all seen the horror stories out there in terms of what people can do with your information. In addition to that, you have other tools that are out there. You have safety tools, which we'll get into a little bit later on. You also have tools that are embedded in your Windows platform, and for those who use Apple, they have similar type of platforms, parental guidance platforms, to ensure that your child is not looking at something that's inappropriate. Also, you have pop-up blockers, which is in Internet Explorers, so those are things that you can engage. But most importantly, as I stated earlier, my kids are 3 years apart, and as they were going through their emerging adolescence stage, especially with my older son, I had to make sure that he was an active citizen, of acting as a role model for what was expected of him as a big brother, and also as a member of the family as it relates to any information that was on the internet, since we had the computer out in an open space. So here's where the tough part comes. When you start having a conversation with your teenager, and as I stated earlier, I have a 16-year-old going on 17, and I have a 19-year-old going on 20. And so here's some of the questions that you might want to ask. In fact, these are questions that actually came from Facebook. Do you feel like you can tell me if you ever had a problem in school? I know that's kind of it could be perceived as a corny question, but it starts with a question you have to ask. And I guess my favorite would be, can you help me set up a Facebook profile? Because kids are very intuitive. They know what the platform is all about, and if you're not on a Facebook or Twitter type platform, they will be more than willing to help you in your endeavors. The other piece is, do you want to foster a good and positive relationship? You want to encourage them so they won't get involved in one-off conversations in private chat rooms. And if anything, you want to make sure that these chat rooms are in a public setting so you can reduce the opportunity for online predators to get involved. As I stated earlier, you want to maintain those set rules, and you want to insist that there's no shared information. We talked about using the internet as a safety tools, which I'll share with you a little later on. We also talked about keeping the internet in an open space. At the age of 15, here's where the tricky part becomes, because what happens is, most cases, the child, or I should say the emerging adult, is going to challenge you. I know mine did, as it relates to what they feel as though they're entitled to do. And I always share with them that any information that's on the computer, I like to deem it as public knowledge, in the sense that if you were in a working environment and you shared some information over the internet, now employers have the right to inspect and regulate the activities that go on the computer. And I just try to incorporate those same types of rules from a business perspective and have it overlay into our home, because these are the same types of requirements that would be asked of them as they get into the working world. You want to also insist that they never agree to meet online. I think those are obvious. We've seen all the, that's NBC Dateline, where they say catch a predator. We've seen those types of scenarios. And so it's important that they at least understand the dangers of engaging in that type of activity. This is another tough conversation, because this is probably something that is deemed as being cool, and this is having the conversation with your teenager about online adult content, in this case pornography, or what they call sexting, which is you could be sending emails or texts to your friends with body parts that might not be appropriate. And again, sometimes teenagers look at it as something funny, but they don't realize that once they hit that send button, that it has a digital impression that is ingrained in the digital atmosphere for life. So you want to make sure that your kids are not visiting any kind of offensive content websites. Just recently, there was, if anybody had the opportunity late yesterday on Eyewitness News, they had a short vignette on this program. It's not a program, it's actually a trend. It's called, let me pull it up. It's called Getting Smacked. Has anybody heard of that? Getting Smacked is basically it's almost like I don't want to call it a cult, but it's a trend where kids are now going out videotaping themselves getting high on either drugs, drinking, and it's like the ultimate badge of honor to be associated with this type of I guess, trend. And what's happening is in Lower Merion, which is a suburb outside of Philadelphia, the video got out on YouTube. The principals and the superintendent of the school district got a hold of it. Needless to say, they weren't happy. And let me just read to you what they stated. It said, this video also serves as a reminder that whether or not your child is engaging in harmful and illegal activities, there may still be significant consequences for attending events where such activities occur. In this age of social media and immediate electronic communications, video and/or photographic images often do not distinguish the innocent from the guilty. Students that participated in school sports or other competitive activities may face a team suspension even if they haven't sipped a beer, but are found to have been in the room at a party where alcohol is served. On the line of college applications, scholarships, and personal reputation, it's definitely not worth it. They were basically saying it's not worth the aggravation and the exposure that could take place. And again, these are the unintentional consequences that take place with your child if they choose to engage in those types of activities. Lastly, you want to talk about cyberbullying and teaching your kids to be a digital citizen. The most important part is, much as you would do in person, you want to do online by being respectful and trying not to be a bully. Let's talk about online reputation. Real quick, you have, these are some of the things that people get involved in. And again, you want to make sure that your kids aren't involved in that kind of activity. Colleges are starting to look at people's websites, so you want to make sure your students are aware of that. On the positive side, students also can engage in a positive relationship where they can engage the schools and connect with the schools, so that is a positive with social media. As I stated earlier, the trend is colleges are starting to look at admissions, so you got to watch out for that. Should you worry, the jury's still out. 62% of the admissions officers are starting to say, hey, I'll look at it and see how that acts as a favorable situation for the student. Texting is another byproduct. Roughly 13%, or 1 out of 3, I should say, of folks engage in the activity where they either receive a text or they have text while they were driving. So the damages of that are roughly 500,000 injuries, or 6,000 folks have died. I think we're pretty much done. The presentation that I have will be, I believe, online. We've pretty much covered a good portion of the presentation, and perhaps at a later date we can address those either online or offline. Are we good for time? Cool. I will close it out. Oh, let me go back to this one last piece, if you don't mind. Speaking of parenting, did anybody see this video yet? Yeah. Okay. I will just close out by saying to you that it's important that you stay calm, because if you had a chance to see this video, roughly 28 million folks have seen this video where they actually, the father shot put about 6 shots into the kid's laptop because of an issue that took place between the daughter and the parent. So just take note, take a deep breath, and enjoy the ride, because it is going to be a nice and rocky one. All right, thank you very much for your time.